There were so many things that I wasn't. I didn't know who the heck I was.
Welcome to the 4th season of Heart to Heart with Michael, the program for the bereaved community. Our purpose is to empower members of our community. This season, we're looking at grief in its various forms, and we'll be looking at the role of trauma as it affects grief. Today's program is Beyond the 5 Stages of Grief. Our guest today is Carole Sanek. Carole Sanek wants people to know that she can be better. She feels it's important for people to know that life is short and that we waste too much time ignoring things that we should be dealing with. She has found it's important to share feelings with others. She's a Facebook live streamer, a freelance writer, content marketing writer, the CEO of Butterfly Boom Productions, published author, winner of 3 best breast cancer blogs, public speaker, and breast cancer survivor of over 27 years. She's a mother and a great friend. In the first segment, we'll learn about her husband, Larry. In the second segment, Carole will tell us about accelerated resolution therapy. And in the final segment, Carole will tell us about the stages of grief that people don't talk about and why Carole feels we need to start talking about them. Carole, thank you so much for coming to Heart to Heart.
I'm so happy to be here.
Let's start with you telling us about your husband, Larry.
He was a great guy. He was my rock, my best friend, everything in the world to me. And we met online through an online dating service about 21 years ago. And we had a really great life. We were in Chicago having just an amazing marriage. I mean, sure, there were ups, there were downs, there were, in-betweens, but all in all, he just was everything that I ever wanted and needed in a husband because he supported me emotionally. And I had not had that in some previous relationships. So he got older as I got older and as we all got older and started to have some heart issues. And we had to rush him to the emergency room twice. And both times he required having a stent placed. The second time, his cardiologist told us that he could not completely stent the artery because there was a bifurcation in it, and where it split off, he couldn't reach that area. And he told us that if Larry had any more angina, we would need bypass surgery. Larry decided to be proactive, and he went to a cardiovascular surgeon, and he had a double bypass done through March of 2017. It wasn't the results we were looking for because he had an emergency procedure that needed to be done immediately. He was bleeding internally, so they had to take him back into surgery a second time. And when he came home, he was in congestive heart failure, which was not something he had when he went in. And for those of you who know what an ejection fraction is, when Larry went into the hospital, he had an ejection fraction of 65%. When he came home, he had one of 30. So the surgery...
For those of us who don't know what that means, what's a good number?
60. 60 is a really good number. Mine's 72. I have a really good ejection fraction. That's the amount of blood that leaves your ventricle, your left ventricle, with every heartbeat. It's the percentage of the amount of blood. You're never going to totally empty your heart. It's, but you want to have quite a bit of that blood flowing out of that ventricle. So obviously with a ejection fraction of 30%, his heart wasn't pumping effectively. Right. And he went into heart failure and had been in heart failure ever since that time. So we did everything we possibly could, and we did it right. He did everything with diet and exercise and losing weight. And then one night, he went outside to take care of our rose bushes, told me he'd be back in, have another glass of wine with me. He walked in the door. His speech was garbled. I realized he had his bottle of nitro in his hand. I flew out of my chair, literally. He tried to speak again, and I knew he was stroking. And that was it. He died in my arms that night. The only thing that kept Larry alive for the next 13 days was mechanical machinery.
I'm really sorry you had to go through that. Did you find that grieving Larry brought earlier traumatic experiences to the surface? I
have to explain it this way. When Larry died, I also, within a period of several months, lost 3 pets. So I had so much grief going on and so much loss going on. Larry's dog never recovered from losing his master. And I had to put him down. He was 17 years old. And we had 2 birds that we had picked up along the way. All of our animals were rescue animals. I feel sorry for something and I bring it home. So over 4 months, I lost 3 pets and a husband. So I didn't have time, in order for me to answer your question correctly, I didn't have time to think about, previous traumatic events. I was dealing with 4 losses, and I wasn't doing very well at the time, that's for certain.
Well, let me ask you then a slightly different version of the same question. A lot of times we talk about a traumatic experience, calling up previous traumatic experiences, which is why I asked you that. But here you had several all at the same time. So how did you find a way through to deal with them in some kind of orderly fashion, or could you make order out of that chaos?
When he first died, I was so busy doing everything that had to be done. I had to close a real estate company down, and the state only gives you 2 weeks to do that. I had to close an office. I had to clean out an office. Oh, Lord. I had to clean out a garage. I had to clean out so much stuff. I didn't really have a lot of time to think about how grief was affecting me. And then one day I realized I had nothing left to do, and I didn't know where to turn. And I remembered that hospice had told me that they have free bereavement counseling. So I contacted them, and I started going to bereavement counseling weekly. I tried group. It didn't work for me. It was too soon for me to listen to other people's grief. I'm better when I do one-on-one talk therapy. So that's where I started finding some salvation, in my life, some way to find out, what am I going to be now? Who am I now? Because when you lose your spouse, you lose part of your identity. Suddenly I wasn't a wife anymore, and I wasn't Mrs. I wasn't Larry's wife anymore. I wasn't his real estate associate anymore. There were so many things that I wasn't. I didn't know who the heck I was and what that left me with. So obviously it made great sense to me to look for answers. And unfortunately, I know that many people don't. They're afraid to go to therapy. I don't know why. I haven't figured that one out, because I have to say that when it's free, it's something maybe you should take advantage of. And, I want to make it a point to say right here and now that many hospice organizations will allow people to come in for counseling, even if their loved one didn't die in hospice. They offer it to communities. And so when I have people who tell me, well, I can't afford therapy, I said, have you looked at the fact that maybe your hospice organization, your local one, offers it for free to the community? Might be group, but at least you're getting some kind of help.
I want to ask you about that, the difference between group and one-on-one, because we hear one of our catchphrases here all the time is grief shared is grief lightened. Can you share the same way one-on-one as you can with a group, or is it different? Because I would think that group therapy, I guess it's not for everybody, but the idea of sharing is a real big lightening.
I find comfort in talking with other people who are grieving of my choice. When I went to group therapy, there was a man there who did nothing but cry. I couldn't handle that. That was just not something that I wanted to have to go and sit through every time we met. It was too much for me. It just was. It was too much for me. And everybody's story was too much for me. I was too new. I was too new. I wasn't ready for it. Maybe in another 3 to 6 months I might be, but I'm still not there yet.
Home Tonight Forever by the Baby Blues Sound Collective.
I think what I love so much about this CD is that some of the songs were inspired by the patients.
Many listeners will understand many of the different songs and what they've been inspired by. Our new album will be available on iTunes, Amazon.com, Spotify.
I love the fact that the proceeds from this CD are actually going to help those with congenital heart defects.
Enjoy the music.
Home Tonight Forever.
Hi, my name is Jamie Alcroft, and I just published my new book, The Tin Man Diaries. It's an amazing story of my sudden change of heart as I went through a heart and liver transplant. I can think of no better way to read The Tin Man Diaries than to cuddle up in your favorite Hearts Unite the Globe sweatshirt and your favorite hot beverage, of course, in your Hearts Unite the Globe mug, both of which are available at the Hug Podcast Network online store. or visit heartsunitetheglobe.org.
You are listening to Heart to Heart with Michael. If you or someone you know would like to be a guest on Michael's program, please email him at michael@hearttoheartwithmichael.com. Now, back to our program.
Carole, we were talking about how you were in therapy before the break. Can you tell us about accelerated resolution therapy and why you want to take part in this kind of therapy?
Oh, yeah, that was a no-brainer. I had been at a session with my bereavement counselor, and she said to me that the University of South Florida had been doing accelerated resolution therapy with victims of PTSD for 8 years, working with veterans, and that they'd had great success and they had received a grant to work with people who are grieving. So they had approached hospice and asked if they had anybody in mind who might be having complicated grief. And my therapist was a little bit concerned that I might be leaning towards complicated grief, which is grief that goes beyond a year. And a lot of times it just cannot be resolved because I was stuck. I was stuck on that PTSD moment in my life with Larry, which was the moment when he went outside, came back in, and died in my arms.
Mm.
You know, you don't expect that. That was such a big shock. And every time that I thought about it, or tried to talk about it, I would break down and I would be just a mess. I'd be a puddle on the floor. I couldn't talk about it. I couldn't deal with it. That was my PTSD moment. So when I got the diagnosis of PTSD from another licensed mental health care worker when I had gone on a retreat in New Mexico, I knew that I might be perfect for this program when she brought it up. So I went out and I took some tests and, got asked a lot of questions. And because it's a medical study, I had to have an EEG while they were talking to me. I had a baseline one. I had a baseline EEG. And it is 4 sessions long. If you look up accelerated resolution therapy, you will find that many people get results like I did in one session, good results in one session. Some people take 4, some people take 6. It is the most amazing therapy. And what they're doing now is they're looking at it for all kinds of different disorders, including depression. It's covered by a lot of insurance. It's a valid therapy. It's actually, I don't know how you quantify or qualify therapy as being affordable, but my therapist charges $100 a session privately. So if you're looking at 1 session, 2 sessions, 4 sessions, that can be very affordable for a lot of people, especially if your insurance would help out, even if it was only 50% pay. So I was very excited about this because for me, it's free. And yeah, I know. So the very first session I had, again, I had to be hooked up to an EEG, and I had to visualize that entire traumatic experience. But that meant I had to go from the night that he stroked and died in my arms to the next 13 days, in the hospital, the tests, the MRIs, the CAT scans, the doctor's opinions, everything that I went through, I had to visualize while we did EMDR. And please don't ask me what that stands for. Because there's a whole bunch. It's the therapy that they use with PTSD where you're using rapid eye movement.
Right. Yeah, I've heard of that.
It's eye movement D something or other. You'd have to look that up. I'm sorry, but for your
it's a whole bunch of letters. That's fine.
Yes,
but
it's a whole bunch of letters.
I want to go back before you continue too far away from it. You touched on complicated grief. One of the things that we like to talk about here is that there's no right way or time that you should expect grief to end. So I'm a little taken aback that somebody has decided that it's complicated after a year. Either grief is always complicated or timing really shouldn't be that important.
That psychological diagnosis book, it's a psychological diagnosis because when you don't deal with complicated grief, they have found that there are people who have committed suicide if they haven't come out of complicated grief. It has nothing to do with an exact timeline. And I do understand that everybody grieves differently, but because they're medical They're psychologists and psychiatrists. They put the timeline on there. They did the studies. They were looking at people who were grieving beyond a year. And when I say grieving, I'm talking about like I was grieving on the floor in a puddle, unable to work, unable to do anything, not eating, not sleeping, all of that. That's complicated grief.
Okay, now that brings you into the therapy.
So in my first session, I came home and I was unable to trigger myself. And that's when I knew it had worked.
Oh.
It's very difficult to explain. You're doing the rapid eye movement for about 60 seconds with a therapist where she's using her hand much like a metronome in front of your face.
Okay.
And then they bring you out of it and they ask you to take a cleansing breath. And then you assess what you feel in your body. And if you have any kind of pain or discomfort or anxiety, then you go back into the EMDR and you do it again. And now you're only paying attention to the pain, the anxiety, the physical feelings that you were feeling until they are relieved. Then you go back to telling your story again. The ending of the session is when you go back in and you rewrite your story, you rewrite your trauma with a positive, I don't want to use the word happy ending, but that's what comes to me, happy ending. And you change your memory. And I know this sounds like way out there. I know it does, but that's what your brain is doing. When your eyes are going back and forth with this eye movement, you are changing that memory in the trauma section of your brain.
Mm-hmm.
It's amazing therapy. I listened to a veteran tell how he had a gun to his head when he changed his memory and saw himself having a birthday party for a young boy in Afghanistan and giving him a soccer ball as a birthday gift. Only this never happened. It never happened. That was the story he created. So then you can go back and you call on that memory when you're feeling terrible. And suddenly you're feeling a lot better. You can't trigger yourself. It's amazing how it works. And it lasts. I asked that question. It lasts.
When you say trigger yourself, that's you test yourself. You go in there and you think. I
did.
You think about Larry. You think about those terrible days, and you're still standing, and that's not triggering it.
I came home and tried to bring myself to that point. I said out loud, I cannot believe that Larry died the way he died and nothing happened. And then I felt guilty because I didn't feel anything.
Well, that's my next question. What have we done? So
I know. I had to deal with that. Oh no, I still cry and I still grieve. I mean, that's all still there. I'm still sad. It's Christmas. Judas Priest, I mean, it's Christmas. Of course I'm sad. I'm having a terrible time getting through this season. But at least I'm not a puddle on the floor anymore and I can function. And I can eat. And I sleep well. So.
Well, that's truly amazing. I think so many people I know in different stages of grief could really use that therapy as a boost.
I was 5 hours old when I had my first surgery.
Wow.
The only advice I can really give someone like that is to be there for your family.
This is life, and you have two choices. You either live it or you sit in a corner and cry.
I am Anna Jaworski and the host of Heart to Heart with Anna. Join us on Tuesdays at noon Eastern Time on Spreaker or Blog Talk Radio. We'll cover topics of importance for the congenital heart defect community. Remember, my friends, you are not alone.
If you've enjoyed listening to this program, please visit our website, heartsunitetheglobe.org, and make a contribution. This program is a presentation of Hearts Unite the Globe and is part of the Hug Podcast Network. Hearts Unite the Globe is a nonprofit organization devoted to providing resources to the congenital heart defect community to educate, empower, and enrich the lives of our community members. If you would like access to free resources pertaining to the CHD community, please visit our website at congenitalheartdefects.com for information about CHD, hospitals that treat CHD survivors, summer camps for CHD families, and much, much more.
You are listening to Heart with Michael. If you have a question or comment that you would like addressed on our program, please send an email to Michael Lieben at michael@hearttoheartwithmichael.com. Now, back to Heart with Michael.
Carole, we've talked about this before, and you've told me that grief goes beyond the stages that Elizabeth Kubler-Ross made popular. Tell us about the stage of grief that deals with cooking and with eating, and tell us also how that relates to the need to feel needed.
Yeah, when I was first going through this, I didn't even realize I wasn't eating. And I wasn't cooking, mainly because Larry had torn my kitchen apart. The weekend before he died, he tore my kitchen apart down to the studs.
Yes.
So the kitchen wasn't a non-functioning kitchen, but beyond that, I had no appetite. So before I knew it, I had lost 25 pounds. And people were starting to say things to me like, would you please eat some pizza? I was getting concerned that I would continue to lose weight. And that's when I saw an article online that had appeared in the New York Times that talked about the fact that some people are starting grief support groups where they cook together. And I thought, boy, does that make sense? Because we have suddenly gone from cooking for two or more to not wanting to cook at all. Larry was my sous chef. He was next to me in the kitchen every night from 4:30 to 7:30. That was our time. That was the time where we made dinner, where we had the glasses of wine, where we laughed and we joked and we talked about the day. And we'd sit and enjoy a meal. And, I'm in Florida, so we enjoyed our meals outside quite often. And, all of a sudden this was gone. And I didn't want to cook anymore. I mean, I just couldn't bring myself to do it. I didn't have anybody to cook for. I'm one of those people who wants to cook for somebody rather than just cook for myself. And I thought this makes perfect sense to have support groups that get together several times a month and they cook together. I thought, wow, what a great idea. And then, when you talk about feeling needed, I think that's another stage that we don't talk about enough because suddenly you don't feel needed anymore. And it's such a wake-up call to realize that people have forgotten about you, maybe. That kind of feeling like your phone stops ringing. The emails don't come in, all those things that happen after a certain period of time. You often see people write about how everybody's there for you through the 3 days of funeral and mourning. And then they go home and you have casseroles in the freezer. But, it's like everything comes to a quick stop.
I can absolutely relate to that. In the Jewish faith, we have 7 days of mourning, and we're completely surrounded by friends and family who do all the cooking for us. And like you said, so there's tons of frozen food in the freezer waiting for you. And people would sometimes ask me, how you doing during that week? And I'd say, ask me on day 8 when there's nobody here, then I'll tell you how I'm doing.
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly. And then one day, I woke up and I said, I just don't feel needed.
Yeah.
And when I realized that was a turning point for me, because that's when I said, darn it, I'm going to do something and I'm going to make myself needed by people. And that's when I started coming to the other side. That's when all my therapies started to work. That's when the healing started to happen.
The being needed again or feeling being needed again is what brought everything into focus. That was the trigger that made everything work?
I made it happen. I realized it had to happen. You know how you say that everybody grieves differently? Not everybody's going to want to make it happen. I just happen. How many times are we going to say happen here? I just be one of those people who said, enough already. I want my life. I want to know my why. I want a purpose. And I want to feel needed again. And, all of a sudden it's happening.
That fits in so well with last season. We talked a lot about post-traumatic growth. That after the stress, not everybody gets it, but comes a moment where you power forward into all kinds of new fields and new areas and things that you find strength that you never had. And it's the flip side of post-traumatic stress that people don't talk about. Was that part of your therapy, was to lead you towards a post-traumatic growth like that?
I think what happened is that when I started in this therapy, which I started back in November, when I started doing the ART and I started reading about it and started learning about EMDR from a psychiatrist who's written a book on it. And, it started to all make sense to me. I started to have these ideas would form in my brain. And I asked my therapist about that today because I had a session today. And she said, oh, yeah, once you heal the trauma area of your brain, things start to happen, and it accelerates, and you want to do more, and you want to be a better person, and you want to have purpose, and you want to help people.
Yeah,
and
that's
where
it.
I am.
That's exactly
where I
it.
am now. Mm-hmm.
Let's talk about some of the other stages of grief, because clearly you're telling me there are more than 5. How many have you got, and where do you go with them?
Oh, goodness. I no longer have anger.
Okay.
I was furious with Larry for leaving me.
Yeah, sure.
Absolutely furious. I went to New Mexico to a healing retreat, and I was able to leave my anger out there. I did a lot of work in the Native American Medicine Circle, which is a wonderful place to sit and think, and meditate. I did a lot of meditation. I find meditation has helped me greatly so that the anger dissipated. I'm not angry with him anymore. I tell him every morning how much I love him, and how happy I truly am that he was ever in my life. My therapist even said to me, he's always with you, always. And he is, because he's in my heart. He lives in my heart. He lives in my head. He lives in my gut.
Sure.
He's everywhere. I see him leaning against a wall looking at me. I see him sitting in a chair looking at me. I have the most incredible visions of him because I allow them in. I welcome them, and I want them in my life.
Sure.
So the anger is gone. I would say acceptance followed that one pretty close, because once I was no longer angry with him, I could accept the fact that this wasn't going to be reversed. This is the way it is.
Right.
He's died. I'll tell you one thing I don't allow anybody to say to me is I don't allow anybody to say, when did you lose your husband? I didn't lose him. He's not wandering in the woods somewhere, and I can't find him.
Perfect.
I look at them and I say, I didn't lose my husband. My husband died. And I correct them. And they're kind of taken back by that. And then I explain why. I said, we have to use the word, people. We're not using the word enough.
I've always had trouble with that word. I've always had trouble. I said, she passed, she's gone, she left us. But the truth is that, and if you listen to all the things that I've been saying for the last 7 years, she hasn't left me. I take her wherever I go, and I see things for her. And with her, I go to all kinds of things and experiences that I have for her, or with her, or through me for her.
Exactly.
So, and I think it's beautiful. It's very, very healthy, very healthy attitude. And I suppose, we all think we've invented the wheel. I suppose that everybody gets there at some point.
I hope so.
Well, I do too, because I believe everyone should find peace and find healing. And there are ways to do it that enable you to go on with your loved one with you, no matter what happens. But I was curious, you talked about other stages. How many are there? And, tell me about one or two of them.
If we're talking about Kubler-Ross, bargaining and denial were not part of anything for me, because there was nothing to bargain over or barely anything to bargain over, because I looked at the MRI. I'm an RN. I knew that this was not a case that he was going to return from. I could see it. I could see the location of the infarct in his brainstem. I knew where the dead tissue was. I knew how large it was. I knew this was a hopeless case. So bargaining and denial just didn't really happen for me. We could shake him. We could apply sternal pressure, and he would wake up he would respond to the pain. He would stay awake for maybe a minute or two. And I'll tell you something else that he did that I will always be so very grateful for. I crawled into bed with him one day. I put on the music from our wedding. The nurse put his arm around me because he was paralyzed on his right side from the stroke. He put his arm around me. Larry managed to put his hand into my hair and caress my head while he was listening to the music. And I know that was his way of apologizing that we couldn't bring him back this time, that he just didn't have the strength to do it.
Carole, thank you so much for being with us.
You're so very welcome. It's been my pleasure.
That concludes this episode of Heart to Heart with Michael. I want to thank Carole Sanek for sharing her stories, her experiences, and so much more with us. Please join us at the beginning of the month for a brand new podcast, and I'll talk with you soon. Until then, please remember, moving forward is not moving away.
Thanks Thank you again for joining us. We hope you have gained strength from listening to our program. Heart to Heart with Michael can be heard every Thursday at noon Eastern Time. We'll talk again next time when we'll share more stories.